comfort, Eru, comfort, Adesua, Eru. The story behind that comfort is that my dad didn't have me quickly. And when I came along in 3 years in Africa, if you don't have that wedding, that's a long time. And when I came along, he said, oh, I'm now comfortable in the community. And he gave me that name, Comfort, which is also Adesua, my middle name, Comfortable. Okay, I'm originally from Nigeria, West Africa. In Africa, everybody has, there's a difference. We are not homogeneous. The continent is not just Africa. You from Africa, do you know comfort? No. It's a big, huge continent with tons of tribes, hundreds of tribes. And those tribes have their own way of doing things. But I can tell you that one thing that unify Africans as Africans, storytelling. In fact, the whole world, every First Nation country has the history of storytelling. And I happen to have gone to school as a little girl because I was telling stories from nowhere, according to my parents. Every morning I would go to one corner and start singing and telling stories. And there was a new school in the village, and my father, who also happened to have gone to a school in the city, knew the value of sending people to school and sent me to school, and against all opposition from his people, because I was a girl. I am a girl. and I became the first girl in that whole school, and the only girl for about 3 years before my sister came to join me as well. So that's how I got my education. And I'm happy that I became also the first woman to go to college in that same area. The first woman, through storytelling. If I had not told stories as a little girl, maybe I would be somewhere else now. So that's how I developed. Interest in words, in telling, in poetry, in anything you have to say with your mouth. In school, I didn't like mathematics because the teacher always had a K. But I loved religion, literature, English language, many other things where you have to use words. They were very good for me. And I went that way, studied French, became a French teacher. But people in my country didn't want to study French in addition to English. So I started using storytelling on my own. The principal would call me and say, Mrs. Ero, you are not following the curriculum. But I didn't listen. And at the end, she saw, when we have an exam called WAEC, it's like grade 12 exam here. At the WAEC exam, West African School Certificate exam, all my students called A's in French, and then she kept quiet. And then the French embassy in Nigeria also asked us to do anything in French, and they would send whoever wins to France. And for 6 good years, as long as I was there, my school won. And many of the students were sent for a long holiday in France. So teaching and raising me up, storytelling helped me a lot. And I'm sure you all have your stories, like my friend there was telling me, I'm just starting to tell story. I said, no, you have been telling since you were little. maybe now as a profession, you are making it your profession. Also, I raised many kids. Their father was very busy, never there. So I raised them. I had 6 kids, and I raised them with stories. In the evening, when everything is done, homework, chores, and then we gather and we tell stories. I formulated many of the stories. Also, when I wanted them to do chores, there's a nice story that I will tell tomorrow that my mother used to tell me to do chores. In Africa, of those days, we washed clothes with our hands, we washed dishes with our hands, and many other things. So when you want the kids to do their own chores, you start that story. I will start that story. The story can last and last for many days. So I used lots of stories to teach them and to gather them around me and to have trust in me. And it worked for us as we came here to Canada, because we stayed together until they get married and they go. We all stayed together, and they focused on their studies until they all graduated, and they are all on their own right now, and I'm free. In Canada, storytelling also opened, Canada opened my eyes to more things here. First of all, we landed in Victoria, BC, and there were very few Africans, and people on the bus would bug us. Where are you from? Why is your hair like this? Oh, you speak in English. Do they speak in English in Africa? And then I said, oh, we have to let people know that Africa has existed long before some of the countries like this. Let them know about us and who we are and what is in Africa. I'm only just an average African woman. There are there are professors and many other doctors from Africa who are women.
Hi, everybody. Please excuse me if I'm a little unfocused. I've just returned from Australia, so it's a long trip, but hopefully I'll be understandable over the course of the next 45 minutes. Before we start, I'd like, if possible, for you to self-identify by putting up your hands, either once or more than once, if the category that I say applies to you. So, I'm just going to ask, how many people in the room are students? Hands up. Okay, so lots of students. How many people here are educators? Great. How many people are volunteers? How many people are working on policy of any kind? Great. Anybody from business here? Great. And from the private sector? Business? Is sort of like foundations or things like that? No? Any social entrepreneurs in the room? Yes. Good. Who's a parent? And who's a grandparent?
Oh,
lucky you.
Not directly.
Yeah. Who in the room makes or creates art in some way on a regular basis? So I can see that we're a community already of common interests on some level. Anyone working in the health sector? Great. Okay, well, thank you for indulging me there. Oh, just one more. Who has English as their first language? And who does not? Great, thank you so much.
The first time, I was mentally linear with my finger. And then the second time, it was more like a sphere. Because when we had to do the 360,
just opened up.
It opened it up.
Yeah. That's often what happens when you imagine things, right? If you can imagine something, then things become more possible than if you're working in a linear or a very logical way. So my premise today is that the power of the arts, the power of the imagination and creativity have all kinds of ways to create profound intrapsychic, personal, interpersonal, community, and other forms of change. And so often when we think about making positive change in our communities or within ourselves, we tend not to use the arts, the power of metaphor, to help us imagine other possibilities. Each do one, and then we all copy you, that's all. Don't think, won't help. Okay? So here. Anyone else? Great. Last chance. Anyone else? Just join the picture. Great. Excellent. Everybody shake up and go back into the shape. No.
Back into it.
It's just a shake.
A circle's a shape.
Okay, so we're all part of the image. Okay, so.
About a decade ago, I was working 17-hour days, and I was exhausted, I was fried, I was a nutcase. My job was implementing patient information systems in hospitals and healthcare settings and doctors' offices. At the time, I was also getting certification on a new system, so I was traveling to Wisconsin every other day, the EPIC system. I'm looking at people that I know from health. And I was suffering from these horrific headaches. I just couldn't, it was chronic headaches that I had. So every other week that I would come back to Vancouver, finally one of these weeks, I'm like, I'm gonna have to go see my doctor because this is just a nightmare. Went to the doctor's office and he had one of those systems in front of him. And he went through the questions. And I kept wanting to interrupt him saying, you know, but I'm working 17-hour days. Yeah, I'm very stressed. And he kept asking me the questions again. 15 minutes later, I had a referral to a neurologist. And, months went by until I was able to go see my neurologist. I was really excited. It's like, this guy, he's going to help me, and I'm going to be done with these headaches. I go see the neurologist. 10 minutes later, I leave his office with prescriptions that might take care of my headache. Taking 2 tablets every day, every morning, 2 in the afternoon, with a lot of side effects. I'm not going to be able to sleep, probably. I'm going to get slightly depressed. I'm going to get overweight. I'm going to all these other side effects. But my headaches might be gone. And I was like, no, not going to have that. I'm not going to do this. So my friend said, why don't you try a naturopath? So, okay, whatever. I just need to get rid of these headaches. So one of these weeks when I was back from Wisconsin, I went and saw the naturopath. And finally, someone listened to my story. And he listened to, it wasn't just what's happening now in your life, we went back, historic information. And by listening about my story, about what had happened in my life, he was able to figure out that there were 3 different reasons for my headaches. And we were able to come up with a treatment plan. Stories are important. They give you the context. I'm not saying data and symptoms are not important. They are important. You have to get the vitals. You have to get that information. But if it's not contextualized in a story, it doesn't mean much. Let's try another example. And I'm gonna, you probably, can I help me go to, I don't know how to do this slide. So, you probably know the DSM-5, the mental health categories, right? This is a definition of obsessive-compulsive disorder. It has a list of the symptoms. People who keep washing their hands, who keep repeating something, right? This is the data. Judith talked about data land, right?
Data stand.
Data stand. So let's go to the video. You'll come. Okay, perfect. Thanks.
The first time I saw her, everything in my head went quiet. All the ticks, all the constantly refreshing images just disappeared. When you have obsessive compulsive disorder, you don't really get quiet moments. Even in bed, I'm thinking that wash my hands. When I saw her, the only thing I could think about was the hairpin curve of her lips, or the eyelash on her cheek, the eyelash on her cheek, the eyelash on her cheek. I knew I had to talk to her. I asked about 6 times in 30 seconds. She said yes after the third one, but none of them felt right, so I had to keep going. On our first date, I spent more time organizing my meal by color than I did eating or fucking talking to her. But she loved it. She loved that I had to kiss her goodbye 16 times or 24 times if it was Wednesday. She loved it took me forever to walk home because there are lots of cracks on our sidewalk. When we moved in together, she said she felt safe, like no one would ever rob us because I definitely locked the door 18 times. I always looked around when she talked. When she said she loved me, her mouth would curl up to the edges. At night, she'd lay in bed and watch me turn all the lights off and on. She'd close her eyes and imagine that days and nights were just passing in front of her. Some mornings, I'd start kissing her goodbye, but she'd just leave because I was making her late for work. When I stopped at a crack in the sidewalk, she just kept walking. When she said she loved me, her mouth was a straight line. She told me I was taking up too much of her time. Last week, she started sleeping at her mother's place. She told me that she shouldn't have let me get so attached to her. This whole thing was a mistake. But how can it be a mistake that I don't have to wash my hands after I touch her? Love, it's not a mistake. It's killing me. She's been going away from this and I just can't. I can't go out and find someone new because I always think of her. Usually, when I obsess over things, I see germs sneaking into my skin. I see myself crushed by an endless succession of cards, and she was the first beautiful thing I ever got stuck on. I want to wake up every morning thinking about the way she holds her steering wheel, how she turns shower knobs like she's opening a safe, how she blows out candles, 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 blows out. Now, I just think about who else is kissing her. I can't breathe because he only kisses her once. He doesn't care if it's perfect. I want her back so bad. I leave the door unlocked. I leave the lights on.
Data, stories. Now the good news, as Judith mentioned, there are some really smart people who have figured out, let's include humanities in the education of health professionals and healthcare workers. So there are programs like the Medical Narrative program at Columbia. There are programs in Canada, across Canada, in the faculties of medicine, that use the humanities, use arts, use storytelling to help educate the healthcare providers and professionals. Believe it or not, there is research to suggest that when you use the humanities, it actually helps the providers learn empathy, learn compassion, learn listening skills. And at the end of the day, it helps them do better diagnosis. It's amazing. Now, there are other powers to the narrative. In telling our stories, frequently the process of sharing your story and having it heard, it's healing. It's empowering for the patient to tell their stories. And, by sharing your story, we're actually making meaning. We're getting a sense of meaning of our experiences. And that matters, right? And the process of sharing your stories, you're actually connecting with community and creating connections and a network. And believe it or not, that's important to our health and well-being. I think Lizzie's going to talk about community and storytelling, right? Sure.
Spoiler.
All of us. So, and another thing about the storytelling, Judith might have talked about this already a little bit. The stories are the best possible platforms for public health education and for health communication. Because people relate to those stories, right? And they actually would make behavioral changes. Now, I want to share one story with you that kind of encapsulates all of these. Eva Markfort. some people have heard about her. I didn't know Eva. She was born in 1984. A year after she was born, she was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. Now, for a kid, pronouncing cystic fibrosis is very difficult. So it's usually 60 fibrosis. In 2006, Eva had an accident and she was taken to the hospital. And let me just see, for those of you who don't know what CF, cystic fibrosis is, it's a genetic disorder. It impacts the clearing of your mucus, and it leads to breathing problems and ultimately, like sometimes lung infections, the need for lung transplants. So 2006, she has an accident, she goes to the hospital, and she needs a lung transplant. And she's given 2 months to 2 years life until she's given a pager, waiting for someone to die so she can live. That's what a transplant is. So Eva, she has a great family. They're extremely supportive, really great friends, but she still doesn't feel connected. She doesn't feel like other people understand what's going on for her. So she goes online and she starts blogging her story. And she calls her blog 65 Red Roses. And in the process of blogging, she creates a community and connects with other people who have CF, other people her age who are going through the same process. And she creates a community. Well, her blog gets very popular. And a documentary is made of her blog and her story. And it gets international attention. It increases awareness about CF worldwide. It raises about $1.5 million for CF research. In 2007, she gets a transplant, and off she goes to university, living her life. Unfortunately, 2009, her body starts rejecting the lung, and she's back in the hospital. On February 18th, it was a month, 2010, it was a month before she died, she blogged, "A mark on the world, a difference, some proof that I had been here, something to say that I mattered, that when my body left this world, my soul had made its imprint." Well, you know what? She did that. She told her story. She told her story, and in the process of telling her story, her experience got meaning. It made sense to her. She started connecting with people. She built a community. And then she took it further. Her story became the basis for awareness about CF. So although she passed away 4 years ago, her story, because of her story, she lives on. Thanks. Thank you.
All right, hello. Hi. I'm Quist-Adade. Usually I don't write it on 2 lines. Let's see if it doesn't. That's cool. Let's go right to, yeah, there we go. That's my company. So how many people here are from Surrey? Or live in Surrey, I guess maybe not from. How many people don't live in Surrey?
Langley.
All right, well, welcome. Yes, welcome to the city center. Things are happening. Very excited to park in the underground parking lot today. Awesome. It's finally open. So my name is Quist-Adade. I'm a filmmaker, as Jessica explained. And when I was 3 years old, I learned the truth about Saved by the Bell. So I don't know if anyone remembers that show. It's like early 90s, might be before some people's time to after some people's times. Early 90s, like sitcom about high school. And when I was 3, I found out that it wasn't just real people. Like I always thought it was real people in high school and they were just being filmed and we were watching it. I didn't understand how fiction worked. And this blew my mind, right? Because I was like, wait, so they just are just pretending and this is their job and other people write it and like why do they do this? Just like it just makes us happy and that's why they do it. Like that's crazy. And so I dedicated my life to tricking other 3-year-olds. And it's going right. I also just think moving images are an incredibly powerful communication tool. Most of what we assume about the world, we learn from movies and TV. How do people in New York speak? I've never been there, but I have an idea of what I think that is. What's life in Texas like? What does a normal family do? What is normal? What do Mexicans value most? Right? And that's kind of a weird one. That's kind of funny. It's like, what do you mean? That's kind of ridiculous, but it's true, right? Because, you might say, well, I can't really answer that question because there isn't a diverse enough selection of Mexicans in our media for me to say that. It's like, yeah, exactly. That's a problem, but it's not a problem we necessarily always think about consciously. And for, there are a lot of people underrepresented or not represented at all, and it affects how we view the world and how underrepresented people, whether it's ourselves or other people, think of themselves. Because think about the Canadian experience, right? Like, what is being Canadian? It's like, yeah, drinking beer, playing hockey on a frozen lake, and wearing plaid and eating bacon. And it's like, okay, well, I grew up on the West Coast, so our lakes don't really freeze. And I'm Muslim, I don't eat bacon. My best friend, Chandler, who I co-founded the company with, is vegetarian because he's Hindu, and I don't wear plaid out of choice. But ultimately what you're told, what's reinforced to you, is like, well, you don't have the Canadian experience. You're not a real Canadian. Like, well, I was born here, I live here, I have senses, so technically that's an experience. So what is, no, the plaid's okay. I'm not calling it plaid. It doesn't work for me, personally. You look great. Also, bacon, I'm sure, is fantastic. But the point is that if you don't have those experiences, it's reinforced that you don't have the Canadian experience. But, what does that then say about me or my friends? Or I live in Newton, which is the densest area of Surrey. It's primarily South Asian, or at least it feels that way where I live. And it's like, what does that say about us, right? Are we not, Canadian? And it made me think of, these like quintessentially Canadian experiences that we have that we don't think of that way because they're not reflected to us. So Sean and I were writing a sketch. We're at like an Indian restaurant. We're ordering stuff. We're standing in line. The guy behind us starts making recommendations. He's like, oh, you guys got to try the chaat here. And the chaat papri here is really good. I've tried it other places. This place is the best. We're like, great, we've never tried it. We'll get it. We got it. Delicious. Calgary sweets, y'all. Besides the point. But when we were leaving, we realized that was a really uniquely Surrey experience because the guy who was making those recommendations was white, right? And it's like, well, that's like that kind of fusion of cultures is a uniquely Canadian thing, and it's something we experience all the time, and it's not really reflected back to us, so we don't get to see it. And that's why we kind of, because we have so many different cultures here, we kind of think of Surrey as a quintessentially Canadian city, which like makes people laugh, but it's kind of true when you think about the cultural fusion that happens here. I mean, I go to events in other cities, and it's never as diverse as events in Surrey like today. Age-wise, culture, background, all of that. It's always most diverse here. And Surrey has a pretty bad reputation, and even from people who live here. A lot of media, most of our media comes from outside the city, and so only negative stories get reported. And that point of view is super outdated. I mean, you're sitting in this building right now. You can see the city hall there. Across the street, they're going to build a pretty incredible building within the next 3 or 4 years. Was it 2014 right now? Great, I know the year. 2 years. And it's just like, where else do you get Hollywood and Bollywood playing at the same theaters? Where else do you, it's not just South Asian, right? Where else do you get genuine sushi for dinner and genuine gelato for dessert? Like, globally, this is a pretty unique place. And it's all authentic. Like, you're getting sushi from, like, people who have learned it in Japan and like moved here and started a place, right? And all the places you go, you get really authentic experiences. But we don't get those stories reflected back to us because mainstream media is super disconnected from that. And we can think of that as a problem, like, Hollywood, television, but as entrepreneurial-minded artists, we think of that as a market opportunity because we can tell our own stories and have people connect to it in a way they'll never connect to Transformers for, right? So that fusion of cultures is what the new media is all about. We focus on telling those stories, and as important as it is to have people tell their own stories, we kind of feel the need to take a few steps back and make people understand that they have stories to tell. It's really hard to access their target demographic when they don't know that they are a demographic, right? Because people have been told that they don't exist for so long. We need people to know that they can enjoy their life. They're allowed to like themselves. Because otherwise there's this kind of cultural schizophrenia that you get growing up here, right? We grew up like, say, in a South Asian family. Your parents or grandparents are like doing a backyard garden, like raising chickens, and it's like, oh, these immigrants, like that's super weird, and like, oh, that's really uncivilized, and you're like, I'm gonna push that aside. I'm gonna move to the big city, and then you like move to East Side, and you make it, blah, 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 you go, and then it's like, oh, the new trend, raising chickens in your backyard. And like, I was there 25 years ago. I thought it was super dumb because it was graphics, you know what I mean? And this is a thing that happens all the time, right? And like elder care, like it's a lot of different areas. So people can value their own experiences and see those as just as valid as the ones they see on TV. We can, move forward on a lot of issues a lot faster because a lot of different cultures have solutions to problems that we are facing and will face. Canada can have as many multicultural policies as it wants, but nothing made me feel as accepted as a ad on the side of the bus for Little Mosque on the Prairie season 2, right? Because like when I saw that, it's like, oh wow, like I exist. I'm allowed to do things like, oh, no one's going crazy that bus is just driving around the city. Like, oh, you're allowed to say who you are. This is crazy. And you know, it's like people, you know, if I now go into the CBC, there's a bit more of an understanding. I don't necessarily have to hide the majority of myself as you normally do in regular life, right? You know, because the damage of repeatedly seeing negative images of yourself is really real. I mean, I don't know how many people have this experience, but like, for me, you know, anytime I see anyone who looks remotely like me on television, there's an instant cringe and like a bracing for like, what's the next shot going to be? Is it going to blow something up? And it usually, yeah, pretty much, right? And that affects you in life. Like I use my credit card almost every day just to have like cross-reference of like where I was and what I was doing. It's just like an instinct. Like it's a real thing, right? Like when I go to the airport, I have a yellow hoodie that I wear so that if you ever need to check like the surveillance, I'm like very easy to track and not confused with anyone. And like don't feel too bad. Like it feels like I'm a spy. It's pretty cool. Like, but it's real. And like that affects how you behave. And I have friends. It's very similar, right? Like make sure you shave before you take that flight, just so you don't have like any. You know, you want to cut out as many reasons as possible. And I don't do that because I've been arrested or because my dad's, you know, been thrown in jail or anything. It's not that I've seen it go wrong so many times, it's that you've never seen it go right. You know what I mean? Especially, again, in those films and TV, you never see it go well, so you can only, you know, better safe than sorry, right? And, you know, those positive stories aren't reflected. You know, like growing up on films, you grew up in Bollywood movies that are, you know, really great, but they're from India, so they're like different people than the people I grew up with. Or you see Hollywood movies, and it's like, okay, it's from here, but nobody looks like people I grew up with. And so we need that kind of third space, and we have that opportunity now with technology to tell those stories in a smaller scale. But we can't fix that and create that third space in a city like Surrey where there aren't any talented, edgy creatives, is what we thought, right? Because we've been doing work for a few years. We led film festivals in high school. We've shot short films and found crew members online who are local and really talented. And we found that there are a lot of really talented young artists who all feel like they're the only person. And so they all feel like, oh, I can't do this. My creative partner, Sham, he's like a pre-med student right now, genuinely has taken the test for like getting into med school, right? Because everybody feels like, oh, I can't make a career out of this like massive market opportunity. So there is, you know, that's why we started Creative Surrey, to connect artists with businesses, because there's over 16,000 independent businesses in the city who want creative work done, with the city itself, who is enthusiastic about growing a creative industry, with academia, we have, you know, SFU right here, with audiences, and with each other, most importantly. So we run meetups. We partnered with the TD SFU Community Engagement Center on this floor. We've done meetups in other places, and basically, we're not really creating anything. There's a lot of potential here. We're just connecting the potential that already exists, and we're finding incredible things happening. And there's actually, I'll talk about that later. Talk to me at lunch about the new South Surrey Art Center that we are having hearings for this week. That would be great to have people support at. It's like a mixed-use contemporary arts gallery and cafe. Check it out. So yeah, so there's a lot of potential here, and we're not creating anything. We're just connecting what's there, and with the power of a shared narrative, we're growing a creative industry where people saw none. Is that? Oh, I have one there, right? Yeah, okay, great. And if we're successful with that, if we can grow this and have smaller stories told and have people recognize their own stories, what does Canadian culture then become, right? What do we think of when we think of Canadian culture in that context? It's not necessarily plaid, hockey, and bacon. Like, I'm sorry I said plaid again. It was just written in my notes. It was natural. You look great. I'll emphasize that again. But the beauty is the same as local creative industries. We don't need to make up a Canadian culture. We don't need to just get it from our beer ads, and we don't need to make up a whole new thing that doesn't relate to the real world. We already have it. It's just about connecting what's already there. And by reflecting the shared narratives we already have, we can create a stronger Canada that then serves as a model for a globalized world. On the spot. They call me the
Hi. Like my introduction went into, I run a company during the day called Cause and Effect, which is a brand consultancy. So we work with companies and organizations and individuals to help them better engage with their audiences. So, you know, in different extremes, in some cases we're helping corporations better develop consumer products. On the other extreme, we're helping nonprofits better engage their audiences around social impact. And along journey of our company, we found that doing some events that were outside our daily lives turned out to be quite rewarding things. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about one of those things, which is this funny word, or two words called pechakucha. It can be pronounced pachakacha. There's a bunch of different ways to say it, but it basically is a Japanese word for chit-chat. And we are the Vancouver producers of this event. It's a global event. It's in about 700 cities around the world now. We've had the pleasure of having Comfort on our stage, and Judith, and Lizzie, and about 425 other people. And so I've witnessed all of these presentations. So I've seen and heard an amazing collection of stories. And what's interesting about this structure is that you're forced to talk through 6.5 minutes, 6 minutes and 40 seconds. So 20 seconds per image, and you're forced to show 20 images. And what that does is it forces you to drastically confine what it is that you are going to say. It's very challenging to tell a story in that length of time. And so what I was going to do is I was going to do it today, which I told myself I'd never, ever, ever do. So don't tell anybody that I'm going to do this, but I'm gonna try to do a pechakucha about how to do a pechakucha.
Do you want me to set 20-second timers?
I've got it automatically.
Oh, awesome.
So you remove the ability for the speaker to adjust their images in any way. So when it hits go, it just goes, and they have to react. So this is what I'm gonna have to do. So it's gonna be really quite painful. So anyway, here we go. So we're gonna talk about storytelling. So this guy, Joseph Campbell. If you haven't read his work, you should. Power of Myth, Hero Has 1,000 Faces. What he did is he built a structure of storytelling around the stages that one goes through on what he calls the hero's journey. So the hero's journey begins, and the hero goes through a series of challenges, meets people, goes through various situations, and eventually returns in a sort of success. And this basically is the structure for every movie ever made. And you can see it again and again and again. So stage one is called the ordinary world. That is the place where you sort of set the premise for the hero of the story. It tends to be a little bit boring. This is Winnipeg. This is where I grew up. This is my street. And there's a sort of a thing to escape. Right? It's the place that you're going to sort of take off from into the great outdoors. And as you think about framing a discussion to people, by doing this, you allow them into your world. You allow them to understand more about you. So this is this is me in the middle and the bottom, 8 years old, soccer team. Absolutely nothing to do with this talk today, but it lets you just get a little bit more about who I am, and there's a connection that begins. So the call to adventure, so that's the beginning of the thing inside of you that's kind of eating at you. So this is me going to architecture school. So I went to the University of Manitoba, trained as an architect for 7 years. And there was this itching thing going on. The third stage is the refusal of the call. So you know something is drawing you out into the world, but yet you don't want to, you're not sure you really want to go to it. So I could have stayed working here, which is a really big firm in Winnipeg called Smith Carter. Really wasn't what I wanted to be doing, but there was something safe about it. Fourth stage, meeting the mentor. So in my case, I met Jane. So Jane has gone on to become my wife and my business partner. And so really she was the one who enabled me to, and I enabled her, to sort of begin the journey. So the fifth stage is called crossing the threshold. This is when you've moved out into the world and you've kind of taken the big step. So in this case, we moved to London. One of the things I got to do in London was design the upper class cabin interiors for Virgin Atlantic. Bizarre situation that very few people would ever get to do, and that was great. Continuing to cross the threshold, we actually came back to Vancouver from London, and that was another big step. It was stepping into the unknown. We didn't know Vancouver at all. It was a new world. This is kind of what the world was that we stepped into. This is what we thought it was. Turns out it wasn't like this at all. This is what the tourism industry wanted us to think. Stage 6 is called Tests, Allies, and Enemies. So that's the real core of the story. That's where you're meeting the people who are going to help you succeed. You're going to meet some people who are going against you. You're going to be continually tested. This is a company that we started called Jorgen Olaf. It was a company that was trying to sell Dutch bikes in Vancouver. Vancouver didn't really want Dutch bikes. We went on to, we got to design Vancouver House for the Olympics in 2010. So this was a venue for trying to tell the story of Vancouver, and it was telling the sort of business story of Vancouver, the green business story, quite unique. And we've got to want to do all sorts of things. This was the rebranding of the local car share company in locally called Moto. So all sorts of different interesting projects to do with building communities, storytelling, communication. It's really grown our ability to engage with larger audiences. And in the process, Pechakucha came up. It came as a little thing that sort of grew and grew and grew and grew. And now it's this sort of cult-like thing that gets 1,200 people to come out all the time and support us. And it's opened the door to the fact that the general public is now our client, I would say, which is a really strange situation to have. And so last month we launched Fuel. Fuel is a new event series that we're working on, which is looking at changing the way that people can interact with each other in large-scale experiences. So really trying to bring change through interesting situations of being together. So, stage 8 is the ordeal. This is the big challenge. This is like going against your biggest fear. So Jane and I made a crowdfunding video that's out online right now, which is like incredibly painful for me to watch and to see. But we wanted to sort of make that sort of step forward. The reward that comes, so this is you've done this big thing, and then you get the benefit. The benefit is that people actually are buying tickets to our event, and they don't know anything about it. We haven't told them who the speakers are, what the context is. All they know is that it has a basic theme and that we're doing it, and people have bought tickets. So that's incredible. The last 3 stages of the story I haven't yet got to. So stage 10 is called the road back. This is like the chase scene in the movie. It's where you've kind of captured the thing and you're running back home and everyone's trying to stop you from doing it. I'm not there yet, but I love Matt Damon in Born Identity. Stage 11 is just as you're supposed to cross the threshold, you have the other, the big obstacle that steps in your way. It's sort of that surprise, and so there's always like the kind of classic Star Wars reference. And then stage 12 is return with the elixir. So that's where you kind of come home, and you've either got the sort of the physical thing, you've grown as a person to share with your community. Your experience is somehow better your continual path. So Kung Fu Panda, Po comes home after defeating the enemy, and this has nothing to do with Joseph Campbell, but always, always, always end your talks with a picture of your children, if you have them. These are my 2 boys. They had a carrot fight at dinner, and they're having to put their noses against the wall. So.
That was exactly 10 minutes. Do you still have a couple more things to say, or do you want to abide by your own rules?
Just a very basic thing that next time you're giving a presentation or a talk to anybody, doesn't matter who it is, remember that the more you give of yourself into that conversation, the more connection it's going to be, the more understanding of where you're coming from, why you're talking about the things you're talking about. So things like where you grew up, what you like, who you know, what's your family, what's your structure, all the things that help you frame who you are as a person is going to make that connection much easier.
Thank you. So our next speaker is the lovely Lizzie, and you have no visuals, right?
No, I only have this happy muffin and coffee. Really lo-fi.
Yeah.
I was just having flashbacks sitting next to you, watching that because I did Penchakucha last year, and that was one of the only times that I've told my story, and I followed your rules. I used childhood photos, vintage photos of my parents, photos of my favorite books, a polygamous photo, because I'm from Utah, and it worked. All those things. And I messed up one or two times, but it was good. It was good. I learned a lot from that process. So my name's Lizzie, and I'm the co-founder and producer of Rain City Chronicles, which is a local storytelling series. By day, I do marketing and communications work, consulting. I don't like using the C word, but I work on different projects, using a lot of things that I've learned working on Rain City Chronicles. So I'm just going to tell you a bit about the show, how it was born, and then some of the elements that I'm really interested in taking it for the next few years. So the story begins in 2009. Actually, the day Michael Jackson died, I moved to Vancouver from Toronto, where I had been living, and I didn't know anybody in the city except for my boyfriend who I moved here with, and I was so hungry and curious to get involved and to meet people and find that community. And I was really inspired by lots of things happening. Obviously, there's stuff that's been going on in the city for a while, like Penchakucha and some other programs, but I felt like there was still something missing. And I had a conversation with a new friend. Her name is Karen Pigeon. She is the other co-founder of Rain City Chronicles. We were canning salsa, and we talked a lot about the storytelling as a challenge and as an element that was really up and coming. So obviously there are shows like The Moth, which is really big in the States, which is a stage show and a radio show. There are other storytelling shows even in the city of Vancouver. But we were really inspired by the challenge of working with people who had stories to tell, but didn't have the space to tell them, or didn't feel like they were worthy of even having space on the stage. And so that little spark became an experiment, which was Rain City Chronicles, and that continues to grow and flourish. And December will be our 5th year anniversary, which is crazy. The format is simple: true stories told well in front of a live audience. Each night is themed, and the show moves, so there's not a home theater for it. It goes across the city to community centers and theaters, and there's a musical guest as well. I was thinking earlier when you're talking about like what does it mean to be Canadian, and I've lived in Canada now for 10 years, and the question that I get asked more that actually came up when we were talking about hockey is, where are you from? And for all of us, even in this room, it's not a simple answer. It's usually a story about being in Winnipeg and becoming an architect, or a story for me about being from Salt Lake City, Utah. So I feel torn about the hockey game that just happened. I guess, or should. But living here and living in Toronto and Vancouver, that question always sparks a long, engaging conversation. And it's usually in a bar or at a dinner party. And I really try to bring that comfortable feeling and connection when I'm working on a Rain City Chronicles event, and try to make both the people who participate to tell their stories and the audience who are listening to really feel that same connection as you would sharing a glass of wine in a kitchen party. So the storytellers that we have, each show has about 9 to 11 storytellers, and it's a mixture of known and celebrated Vancouverites, people who tell stories professionally, journalists, radio hosts, writers, comedians, actors, people that feel, comfortable on stage, and what I like to call new storytellers. So people who have not had the chance or the challenge to share their story, who need a format and maybe a bit of a push. And the combination of the two in the night makes for a really special event, at least in my eyes, where the people who have not been on a stage before, they're both challenged to be really brave and very vulnerable. And yet, when they're on a bill with notable names like John Valiant or Grant Lawrence, or I don't know, big name storytellers, their voices are equally as important. And it's usually the storytellers who, virgin storytellers who really surprise and delight and blow the audience away. And that's something that I'm always humbled by every time that I work with them. So as the simple format of a show, really lo-fi, like my talk right now, just storytellers and microphones in a space. I've really become interested in using the venue or the space as an extension of the theme or the stories of the city that we're trying to tell. So when Rain City Chronicles started almost 5 years ago, the idea was that to engage Vancouver as a city, there's obviously neighborhoods and pockets, and I was told 3 months into living here that people didn't like, if you lived in Kitts, you didn't want to leave Kitts. If you lived on Main Street, you didn't want to leave Main Street. So I was like, okay, well, if we're going to start an event, then we'll have it move so we can at least tap into those communities and tell the story of those communities, which is how that idea of a traveling show kind of began. So I've been to different community halls and legions, and then it kind of moved from there, where the venue either dictated or helped dictate the stories that were being told, or we actively searched a venue that would support the stories. So last summer we were at the Chinatown Night Market, an open air show, which was really fantastic, telling stories of Chinatown in that space. We've done hotel stories at the Hotel Vancouver in that beautiful hotel ballroom. We recently in November did stories about public school at Strathcona Elementary and Templeton High School, and hearing people tell embarrassing stories of high school in a high school gym auditorium, it was kind of surreal, and that's something that it's a challenge that I'm really, really intrigued by, and the more and more I do that and have conversations about spaces that this show can access, it's interesting to think about the importance of space, historical space, where we feel comfortable as an audience to even set up. If all we need are chairs and a microphone and a bar, if we have access, if the city will let us go into certain buildings, or if we have to break some rules to make that happen. So I think that adds a lot of energy to the work that everyone in this room does, is really thinking outside of the box and where we can bring this kind of dialogue and exchange into the city and really surprise people. The other piece of a storytelling night, or telling the story of Vancouver, obviously in its people and the spaces, but another piece that I'm really inspired and intrigued by is food. And I've done 2 sort of food collaborations and planning for a few more this year. One was Yin Yang Express, which was in September, and there were 3 nights that we collaborated with, it escapes me right now. Rice Paper Magazine and In-House Festival. And we did dinners with 75 people and 3 storytellers in a Hong Kong style pop-up dinner. And people being able to eat food that was the story of a culture being told by two chefs while listening to stories. I couldn't ask for anything more exciting. It was so fantastic. And from that moment, we took that idea to our events in November, which were our public school nights, and did a pop-up dinner in the cafeteria. So when people arrived, they could eat great food made by chefs, served on a blue tray in the cafeteria, eat that food, drink like grape drink, eat like mac and cheese and pizza stuffed buns, and then sit and hear stories about high school. So the immersive experience involving food and the way that kind of breaks the ice and gets people to connect, because everybody can talk about pizza, and it really gets those stories out of people. That's something that I'm really intrigued in moving into. So if you have an interest in foods, one more minute, I'd love to hear more. One more minute, okay. So I think that's about it for me. Rain City Chronicles is always evolving, and we have a focus on expanding our reach and diversity and focusing on diverse voices in the city. So if you have access to people that you think should be involved, don't hesitate to bug me, and I really appreciate being here.
I smell love in this room here. Is it Valentine's Day? Oh, actually it passed last week. But I still smell love, the aroma of love. I smell the aroma of chocolate. Are there any chocolate lovers here? Very good, very good. My story is about chocolate and cocoa beans. It is very likely that the chocolate you ate recently contained beans that I grew, cocoa beans that I grew some 30 plus years ago in a far-flung village in Ghana. And here I am today in my newfound home, Canada, helping in my own small way to train the future leaders of this country. I teach social justice in local and global contexts. And I always try to capture the theories, abstract theories that I teach, spice them with stories. And one story that I've used to explain and illustrate the global sociological imagination and global social justice is my story of cocoa beans. How, or the link between my cocoa beans and my contribution to train the future leaders of my own new home, Canada. So let us watch my story. I didn't have a Hollywood budget, so the quality will be a bit suspect.
We suspect.
What have microcodeings got to do with Canada, a journey on the global sociological imagination lane? I was barely 5 years when my auntie borrowed me to live with her in the village of Tiawia, in a remote part of the eastern region of Ghana. As a child growing up in the village, I planted a great deal of cocoa seeds and seedlings. At the age of 8, I was already growing cocoa seeds on my auntie and uncle's farms. Cocoa seed planting was my part of the division of labor on the farm, and I did this for more than 10 years. So what, you ask? This little slice of my life story will vividly illustrate the process, logic, and dynamics of the subject matter of this course. It will also offer you a lucid lesson in the global sociological imagination. The global sociological imagination is based on the assumption that our individual biographies are not written or created by us alone as individuals, but are also the collective products actions and indeed inactions of legions of people, many of whom live in far-flung corners of our global landscape and whose paths may never cross ours in our lifetime. The global sociological imagination is an extension of American sociologist Charles Wright Mill's sociological imagination, which posits a link between personal biographies and societal histories. Private problems and public issues. The present with the past. Having the global sociological imagination enables us to develop a keen awareness of the fact that our actions, seemingly inconsequential, do have ramifications, rippling far beyond our immediate environments and our shores. Think about it. Have you eaten chocolate or had a cup of cocoa drink or hot chocolate of late? If you have, chances are that the chocolate bar you ate or the cocoa drink you had contained beans from the cocoa trees I planted some 30 years ago in Tievia, also known as Uwiafi, Sunrise Village. Canada imports cocoa beans and cocoa products from various countries, including Ghana. Thus, the cocoa seeds I planted as a child is today providing nourishment to you and hundreds of thousands of your compatriots, and employment to even more Canadians who work in the chocolate and other chocolate-related industries, and employment to even more Canadians who work in the chocolate industry. That is not all. All my education, from high school to graduate school, was paid for by people I call my unsung heroes and heroines in villages and cottages across Ghana. Money set aside by cocoa farmers in Ghana in the form of the Ghana Cocoa Marketing Board scholarship scheme financed my education. And here I am today, a professor in Canada, helping in my own small way to educate the future leaders of this country, my newfound home. But my being here in Canada would not have been possible without Canadians purchasing cocoa products, chocolate bars, cocoa drinks, etc. Canadian communication studies scholar and social philosopher Marshall McLuhan put us all in the global village, where willy-nilly, for better or for worse, we inhabitants are increasingly becoming interconnected, integrated, intermixed, intermingled, and interdependent. Whatever happens at one corner of the village affects all of us almost instantaneously. It is my hope that this course will ignite your own global sociological imagination so you can properly see your place in the tangled web of the global scheme of things. Know what role you can play in making our global village better, keeping in mind that your actions and inactions affect all members of the village. For as Martin Luther King Jr. put it so beautifully, we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. That's my story.
At that point, it was still a small city.
All the time. That's why they decided to bring her out to meet other people. So the story brought her out, especially stories from her background that she understood. She didn't speak my language. I didn't speak it. We are African, but she didn't speak English, just a little. But she could get along. So I used pictures with them. I used many other things. When I said,
It's their personal experience.
They don't have a lot of survivors, or they're rare, or they're less sympathetic. So the best example from cancer is people are very sympathetic to things like breast cancer, but not sympathetic to lung cancer.
All right,
Because the idea is people who got lung cancer kind of brought it on themselves.
It's their story rather than, yeah.
How do you know?
Which is what I'm talking. Once it's their story, that's where the building comes. Once people identify with the story, or it's their story. Their own story.
It was covered. I'm going to read what we have, and it's not going to be coherent, but you can glean whatever you want from our conversation from me reading this out, if that's okay with everyone.
Oh, lovely. The
Thank
teamwork.
you so much. Okay, so building community and business through storytelling. Businesses and industry can rapidly change a community. Why is it important for businesses to engage with the public?
And taking who we are, where we come from, whatever our foundation is, however different it may be from each other, that presenting it somehow opens opportunities for other people to open up to who they are for themselves, right? And to start contributing that and participating with that, either just in their personal life, their family life, or beyond. You know, we talked about so many different perspectives here, right? You know, working with great big systems like Nikki and
I wanted to add to that because I was thinking of one of the things that we talked about in the healthcare group, or that I talked about, is narratives used to raise awareness for illness. So breast cancer awareness is one where people telling personal stories had a huge impact on the visibility of that disease and people's understanding of its impacts on families and women and everybody.
Yeah, but one can look at how they did that so effectively and be like, oh, how can we use some of these methods for positive change?
People, that is a high-level academic area study called the aesthetics of political economy.
Looking for work recently, and connecting with your idea of marketing being a kind of storytelling, and certainly
how much own, what I have to own, and this is part of it. And so even, you know, you making, I'm not making any suggestions for separation.
You too. Good luck with the journey.
Good to meet you. I'll look up your phone.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for the view.
What is the YouTube channel? What's that?
Red and White Pictures.
Red and Pictures?
Two things need to get done right now. The first one is find your conference pamphlet, or your package in the foldy thing. Pull out the feedback form and spend 5 or 10 minutes doing the feedbacks. So it's going to be fairly quiet, solo, sit wherever you like. Be honest. They can be anonymous, so I won't know what you said, but be honest. Like, maybe the conference was a little too long. Kind of feels like it right now, doesn't it?
I was wonderful.
Yeah, you're going to put that, I know.
I'm just going to suggest rather than breaking out the three, we could probably just point.
There was probably a, yeah. Okay.